You've nailed the handshake and have just sat down. You stare across the desk at the hiring manager. You're making great eye contact. This job is yours. You've earned this job. The recruiting manager leans in a little closer to begin the first question. If you were shrunk to the size of a pencil and put in a blender, how would you get out? Bizarre questions like this are becoming more commonplace in the interview process. And while many people think they are being asked just for the sadistic pleasure of those doing the recruiting, questions like, why is a tennis ball fuzzy, actually have a serious intent. Today I'm going to help you understand why these bizarre questions are being asked, and I'm going to give you some tips so you can ace your next interview. The first thing to remember is that all bizarre questions fall into one of 5 categories. And if you understand the questions and the sort of thing that is being looked for by the hiring manager, then you're at least 3/4 of the way to having a successful interview. The first sort of questions are the Brainteaser questions, where you're asked to solve a problem-solving type of question. If you were in a dark room with 19 grey socks and 25 black socks, how would you find a matching pair? There are storytelling type questions when you're asked to tell a story about yourself. For instance, if you were shipwrecked on a desert island, how do you spend your time? There are questions to find out more about your personality. If you were a vegetable, what are you? And then there are questions designed to find out your prejudices and test your sense of humor. If you had 3 pieces of cake, but 4 friends, who would not get cake? And why? And finally, there are the very absurd questions that test your creativity in solving problems. How do you get a giraffe into a refrigerator? So let's begin with the Brainteaser type questions. You have 8 pennies, 7 pennies weigh the same, 1 weighs less. You have a jeweler's scale. How do you find the penny that weighs less in 3 steps or less? Don't panic. The interviewer doesn't actually expect you to have the answer to this. But what they're actually looking for is if you can explain a step-by-step process by which you arrive at an answer. But my tip to help you solve this one, if ever you get this type of question, is this. Divide the pennies into 3 groups, 3, 3, and 2. Take the 2 groups of 3 pennies, put them on the scale. If 1 weighs less, take that group of pennies, take 2, put them on the scale. And if they weigh the same, then the penny that you haven't put on the scale is the one that weighs the less. Another category of questions require you to tell a story. And this is to test your verbal abilities. So you may get a question such as, if your life could be summed up in a newspaper headline, what would it be? Now, as hundreds of headlines flood into your mind, you only have one job. You just choose a newspaper headline and you expound upon it. How I was abducted by aliens is not the way to go. But you could choose something like, life is a box of chocolates, or been there, done that. Because both of those newspaper headlines are ideal for telling stories about yourself and actually explaining some lessons learned from your life experiences. The next category of questions are to uncover your personality traits. And these are often along the lines of, if you were a kitchen utensil, what would you be? If you were a type of cookie, what type of cookie are you? But my favorite type of question is, if you were a dinosaur, what type of dinosaur would you be? The best approach to this type of question is to go backwards and forwards, discussing different attributes until you hit on a group of attributes that you think are commendable and that the recruiter is looking for. For instance, you could say that a T-Rex is solitary and aggressive and it's not a team player. But a brontosaurus is slow and clumsy. It likes to stick with its own kind and walks around with its head in the clouds. But what you want to be is the type of dinosaur that survived the mass extinction and maybe evolved into a mammal or a bird. And so with that type of dinosaur, it probably persevered, it had tenacity, and it was adaptable, and hopefully those are the sort of characteristics that the recruiter is looking for. Some questions will test your sense of humor, and so you might get a question, what do you think of garden gnomes? Now, never denigrate a garden gnome, because that might be perceived that you have prejudices against people who wear dungarees to work, or you are biased against people who are physically different. Instead, you extol the virtues of garden gnomes. They like to work outdoors. They look after donkeys. They love to work, and they work hard, as denoted by the wheelbarrows that they push around. And when they're not working, they like to fish. And finally, let's get back to the question that I asked at the beginning. If you were shrunk to the size of a pencil and put in a blender, how would you get out? Well, this is a bizarre question, but the bizarre thing about it is that you have to come up with an equally bizarre assumption to answer it. And the way that you answer it is you say, you put your hand in your pocket, you come out with some magic jelly beans. Eating the magic jelly beans allows you to grow larger. As you grow, you can put your feet against one side of the blender, your back against the other side of the blender, and you shimmy yourself up and out over the top of the blender, like a mountaineer would shimmy up a rocky crag. So that's how you would get out of the blender. There are any number of inane questions that you can answer by having magic jelly beans in your pocket. So I've now gone over the 5 categories of bizarre questions that you will likely to come across. There are the problem-solving questions, the storytelling questions, the questions about your personality traits, questions to uncover any prejudices, and then there are problem-solving questions that are of the absurd variety. So now you should have all the information you need to be able to answer any curveball questions thrown your way, including if you were ever asked to explain Facebook to grandma. Toastmaster.